Hello and welcome to the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. Our guest today is Dr. Geoffrey Mount Varner, and we're talking about his new book, Home Alive, 11 Must Steps for Surviving Encounters with Police. Welcome this morning, Doc.
Hi, hello, and thank you for having me.
Now, Doctor, there's definitely a problem, as we have seen over many, many years, between the police departments around this country and communities of color,
Yes.
especially the African American community. Before we talk about the book, let's state the issue. What are some of the issues that we're facing, or African American males especially facing, when they're having encounters with police?
The issues that we're facing is that it's not rumor, it's not innuendo, it's been factually proven. The data shows that black males are being harmed and killed at a disproportionate rate than their colleagues. True, you will hear that the total number of people killed are white, but the greater proportion are black males. And it's a problem that has been here for a while, and it does not appear to be getting better.
Let's talk about what prompted you to write the book. You're an emergency room physician, an ER physician, and you talk about one of your patients, and we don't even have to say the name, but you talk about one of your patients and an encounter between the patient and the police officer who brought the patient in.
Right.
And it was a violent confrontation.
Yes.
Tell us about it.
So there have been several patients. I'm a father, so I have a son now who's old enough to be killed. And during that period of time, I had this patient, let's call it the patient Paul. I went to go see him. He was handcuffed, and there was an officer there. The officer and the patient kept having an exchange. The officer would tell the patient to do one thing, and the patient would choose to do something else. And every so often, the officer would whack him. And even once the patient was advised, sit still, so forth and so on, he would lunge at the officer, and the officer would whack him. Now, I'm not an officer, but I'm not sure if the patient needed to be whacked. I'm not sure why the patient chose to keep jumping at the officer. What I do know is when I stepped out of the room to go talk to the patient's family, there's a great commotion in the room. And so I had to run back, and the officer and the patient were in a full-fledged fight, although the patient was handcuffed. And so it was interesting to see this patient being beaten, but I could see how the officer thought that he was being threatened. Somehow the patient's mother was able to witness part of this because she followed me back, and her screams, the screams of watching her son get hit by the officer, that was the most impactful phase of this, because in the end, the patient was whisked off. Patient ended up being fine, but the mother still had the pain.
So in other words, when we have situations like this, these encounters with officers, it doesn't just affect the person involved, the person who might have committed a potential violation. It affects an entire family, especially if that person dies. Because as you said in the book, if you're dead, you're dead.
Right, right. So I don't mean to sound crass, but as you stated, I am an ER doctor, so I deal with death regularly. And while it's unfortunate when people die from any circumstances, it's the family members who are left over to have to deal with it. Because after all, the person's dead, but the family, the loved ones, the children, they have to endure that pain. They have to fill that void. So anything you can do to decrease people's pain, that's better. Because after all, tears are salty. They're not black. They're not white. They're not purple. Tears are salty. So when people have pain, it hurts. So anything we can do to minimize people's pain, then I think that as humans, we have that obligation.
You did a lot of research for this book to get both sides, because This book is not about police bashing.
No.
It's about giving serious strategies to people to help them save their own life.
Right, right. So I read several hundred articles, as well as because I have two sisters that are judges in the area. I had unique access to people. People were able to like share stories with me. That's officers, prosecutors, victims, regular citizens, and as I said, several hundred articles. And in all this, what I learned was that there's an enormous problem. But let's take a step backwards. Until 2015, there was no accurate data in terms of the number of police killings. It wasn't until the Washington Post and the Guardian newspaper that they began to keep stats on the number of killings. So it's only been 2 years that we were able to factually prove, hey, officers are killing a number of people. For instance, in 2015, there were 1,200 people killed by the officers. That's equivalent to a plane full of people, 100 people, going down every month in the United States. Every month. And so what that says is that we have a problem. And to put a context on there are some industrialized countries that they have 0 police killings each year. So America has the largest numbers of police killings. In no way am I saying that the officers are just randomly killing people. I'm just simply making a comment that we have a systemic American problem that it's going to take an American effort to fix.
You stated that number of people. How many of those people are African American? How many of those people are African American males?
Okay, it is a disproportionate number. Let's just say that overall, Black Americans are 5 to 9 times more likely to be killed by the police than their colleagues. And the reason why I don't give you an actual number is because there's about 5 different numbers out there. But the one thing that is consistent is that it's about 5, is that Black Americans, especially Black American males, are 5 to 9 times more likely to be killed by the police than their colleagues.
I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. You say that you're giving these strategies to how to deal with police. Each police department is different. The police department in Jackson, Mississippi is going to be very different from the police department in Trenton, New Jersey. How do you fit all of these ideas into one package?
Well, you fit them because we're all human. We're all going through a human experience. For instance, one of the points is that I state is don't run. Seems simple, but there are some areas where people are just taught to run. Well, if you run, and this is when the science comes in, your fight or flight response kicks in, and that increases your cortisol level. Cortisol causes cloudiness, causes cloudy judgment. So all of a sudden, you're running, the officer's running, his judgment's clouded, and you're also running away from the public space. So now all of a sudden, you have this upset officer who has cloudy judgment, and you alone. It doesn't make for a good fit for like anyone. And I get it. It's sometimes easiest to run, or that's our natural reflex. But that's where training comes in. If we train ourselves before we're even pulled over, and Black males should just accept they're going to be pulled over, they're going to be stopped. So knowing that means that you've got to control the controllables, and that's you. We can't control the officers, but we can train ourselves in terms of how to act. And in no way am I saying that this is just a citizen problem. This is an American problem that law enforcement, they're going to have to do their part. But in the meantime, these steps are just a bridge that will allow us to immediately save lives.
You just said one step, which was don't run. Let's go over some of the other steps.
Okay. The other one is, and this one really applies to fathers and those who have a grand standing within their family. It's be a superhero. And what I mean by that is, there's been many cases where you're pulled over, your family is in the car, and you're used to having a certain amount of status within your family. So when that officer talks to you or belittles you, your natural reaction is to confront him and to step up, especially given that your family's right there. But if you train yourself, train your family before that traffic stop, you say, hey, Johnny and Sally, this is what's going to happen. If the officer ever pulls me over, Daddy is going to be so humble, Daddy's going to be so meek, you are probably going to laugh because Daddy is going to act like he's really, really scared. What that does is it keeps you from having to flare up. You're a superhero. You've shown your kids, hey, this is how I'm going to behave, and you've taken the emotion out of it because you don't have to worry about being minimized in front of your kids and in front of your family because you've already trained them, you trained yourself, and you are ready for it. And guess what? If the officer treats you nicely, no big deal. But there are a lot of examples where men are demeaned in front of their families, and therefore there's a reactionary response.
What about things like reaching for your license? You're told to give your license and registration, you go to reach for the license and registration, and somehow that causes the officer maybe to feel threatened in a way. How do you deal with that?
So the first thing that you do is you ask him for every move. I mean, if he says, get your registration out, and then you repeat back to the officer, you're saying I can get my registration out. That's okay, officer. And then you continue to look at the officer while you blindly reach, and then you look at the officer again and say, officer, is it okay for me to reach my hand there? Do you feel safe, officer? Because keep in mind, it's all about the officer feeling safe at that point. Because usually once the officer feels safe, things tend to de-escalate. But as long as he feels or she feels unsafe, your life is a big concern for you. So making him feel safe or her feel safe, ask him for everything you do. And most importantly, no sudden movements. And this is another, and let me go back to the theme. Each one, teach one, till I save one. Know who is in the car with you. Know if they are carrying any contraband. And keep in mind, if you're pulled over, everybody in the car is pulled over. And they need to accept that. That means nobody in that car needs to mouth off to the officer.
Say that again, each one.
Each one, teach one, to save one. So then once you read the book, learn the steps, teach them to like somebody else. And then they will teach them to like somebody else. And each time you are saving one. And again, these are, I would call these are bridge steps. Because we have an American crisis with these officers and citizens. And it's going to take the public health experts, it's going to take law enforcement, citizens, and churches years to fix this. But in the meantime, you do these steps, you can immediately start to save lives.
What are some of the other steps involved?
Well, some of the other steps are be humble. It seems simple, but at the end of the day, an officer wants to feel respected. Doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what you do, whether or not you're a big-time doctor or lawyer or senator. The officer on that scene, he controls that scene, and he or she expects you to treat him with respect and deference, and that's what you should do. A very simple one that people don't like. I also say one of the rules are don't look the officer in the eye for too long. Why? Because for many young black males, the initial heightenedness of the situation starts with a stare down. And for those of us who are black males, we know that officer, we know that look that officer gives us. And that look is one of, I will hurt you, son. And so the way you deal with that is don't look at him for like 2 eyes, because you don't look at him in the eye for like too long, because you don't want to give him any reason to think that you're challenging him. So and people call it demeaning, but keep in mind, the goal is to make it home alive. And then within the book, it talks about once you get out of that situation, then you have the greatest power, because then it gives you steps of what you can do to deal with what happened on that scene if something did happen.
That makes it seem like not staring the officer in the eye. It makes it seem like that the onus is on us to make the officer feel as comfortable as possible. And that does sound like that could feel demeaning to the average person. It reminds me of in the Deep South, where my mother came from, Calhoun County, Georgia. You couldn't look a white person in the eye for too long or without them feeling intimidated. And what about the person who says, excuse me, I'm a human being too. Who the heck are you? Why do I have to make you feel a certain way?
And those are very valid points. And in my book, I'm not asking people to think what I think. I'm just asking them to think. And at the end of the day, putting on my ER hat, the pain of families when they lose loved ones is enough for you to say, let me put my ego to the side here. Let me deal with this situation, get home alive, and then there are steps laid out about how you go back and deal with that situation. But keep in mind, it's one of the few systems in the world where the officer has all the power on the scene. All the power. And people say, well, I shouldn't have to. Of the 3,000 people who've been killed by officers in the last 10 years, only 54 officers ever faced charges. And of those 54, only 6 ever went to jail. Keep in mind, the bar is very, 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 very low in terms of the officer being able to use force and it being approved. At the end of the day, it's not fair, it's not right, but the goal is to make it home alive.
Once you do make it home, what steps can you take if you've had an encounter with an officer and you were not satisfied, you feel like you were violated in some way? What can you do?
Well, let's back up a few more. First, the first thing that we can do, even prior to being pulled over, is we must vote. And we must vote in our local elections. The reason why that's so important is, let's look at Prince George's County. Our county exec chooses our police chief, and that's where the leadership stems from. So it's very important for you to put a county exec in place who supports your value. Like in the next voting season, I would encourage people, hey, ask your county exec, can I see your use of force policy? Because the use of force policy, that's what decides how the officer goes about using force. Most of us don't even know about it, but it's a public document that you can ask your elected officials that you want to see their version of it. But back to your original question. Once something happens to you and you make it home alive, the first thing you like to do is go to the local station where it happened, or go to the station closest to where it happened. File an official police report. This part's key. Get the name of the person that you hand it to. And you must say to that person, what's your name? And let them see you write it down. Then the second thing you like to do is that you go home, and whoever your elected official is in that area, you send that same document to them. With those two steps, just know at some point, you and that officer are going to through a series of meetings, you all will one day come face to face again. But this time, it will be on equal ground. You will be able to speak what you think happened. He will be able to speak, he or she will be able to speak what they think happened. And most importantly, it goes in the officer's record forever. And that's what we need. We need to document some of these officers who may not be doing the right thing. And I will be the first to say, in my research, what I found is that officers, like any other industry, most officers are good people trying to do the right thing. But similar to physicians, we've got some bad apples. Out there are some bad apples as well. And we have to create a paper trail so that we can catch those bad apples.
You said something a little bit discouraging, which is that a lot of times nothing happens. You have this encounter, you make a complaint or what, and nothing happens. It goes into their record or whatever, but it sounds like a lot has to go in their record before something actually happens.
Well, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to state nothing happens. It depends.
Or not nothing happens, but a very small percentage of the officers pay any penalty for mistreating people. But I definitely, I'm a firm believer in making a paper trail.
Absolutely.
You make sure you document the officer's name, who you talk to, because you're absolutely right. If you don't get those names, then nothing is going to happen.
Right, right. Well, I didn't mean to suggest that nothing happens, but often citizens are not privy to the outcome if there are disciplinary actions. You go in front of the Citizen Council and you state what happened, and if there are disciplinary actions, often citizens are not informed.
You made a good point also, that it's going to take work from all facets of the community. What do you think about community policing efforts?
I think that community police efforts are extremely important. I think walking the community, getting to know your like neighbors, being steeped and being part of that community makes you care about the community, and it makes the community care about you. After all, the book is called Home Alive, but it's not just about citizens getting home alive. We want our officers to get home alive too, because as I stated, most officers, I would even say upwards of 95% of them are good people just like us, who have families who want them to get home alive too.
You are an ER doctor, as we've been discussing throughout the program. You've seen a lot of death in your work. What was the most shocking thing you discovered while doing research for the book?
Shocking things just in terms of?
Just in terms of how things are handled, how many people this has affected. What made you say wow as you were doing your research?
What made me say wow came early and late in the research, and that was, my book talks about police killings, but police lethal use of force is a bigger number. Lethal use of force simply means the force that they applied that could have killed that person, and it may or it may not have. For instance, there are some counties that when the police shoot at someone, they have a hit ratio of maybe 10 to 15% in terms of hitting them and less in terms of killing them. So my book only looked at the killings, but what about all those people that the officers shot at and tried to kill, shot at and actually hit them, but did not kill them? And the second one is all the times the officers ran someone over. So while I looked at police killings, and those numbers are about 1,200, my non-scientific estimate, when you look at lethal use of force, the number of people that the officers try to kill is at least 5 times more than that. And again, I'm not making any suggestions about innocence or not innocence. I'm just talking about lethal use of force. The number of times the officers applied a force that could have killed a citizen.
Now, your book is available everywhere at this point in time?
Everywhere, but mainly on Amazon.
Okay. Also, we got to wrap this up on a positive note. What would you say are the prospects for the future? Do you think that we have brought enough awareness to this issue, and especially over the last couple of summers with all of the things that have taken place? Do you think we're bringing enough focus on this issue, doing shows like this show today, to really start working towards making things better?
I think that the future looks good. I think that the citizens, I think that police departments are now more focused on this issue. As I stated earlier, they had no data, but now the data's out here. It's only been available for like 2 years yet, and it's clear. And police departments, because they recognize that they are the natural part of the American fabric, they want to do the right thing. They're putting in steps and processes to weed out the bad apples and to keep the bad apples from coming in. Citizens, black, white, purple, and green, they are uniquely aware that there is an American issue here and that it's going to take an American involvement to fix this crisis. So I think that in the past, people thought it was just those folks, but now with video cameras and with data, people see it's not just those folks. We have a problem.
I'm telling you, that video, the whole video age has just changed the face of this.
Yes.
Because it's something that we as African Americans have always known, but it is now visible to the world in so many different instances. One more question. It's so interesting the way other communities think of police opposed to the way the African American community thinks of race. And I'll have you answer this very quickly. We're raised to see officers differently than whites are. So I guess that's why the perception of police brutality has been different in our community. It's just something that's known. You know that there's going to be you're going to have an instance somewhere where you may be pulled over just because you're an African American and you may be driving a certain car. So I'll give you a few seconds to answer that question before we wrap it up.
So it's a fact that traditionally, it dates back to the South, that the police have treated Black Americans differently. As we have moved up north and have gained a bit of prosperity, that line has changed. But overall, there's still this view that when it comes to Black males, that they're dealing with a criminal, whereas our colleagues, they get the benefit of the doubt.
Yes.
And that's what we're seeking, is the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you so much for joining us. We've been talking to Dr. Geoffrey Mount Varner, and the name of his book is Home Alive: 11 Must Steps for Surviving Encounters with Police. I'm Stephanie Gaines-Bryant. You've been watching the Sisters for Fitness Wellness Show. Have a great day.